Welcome to Good Life Project, the weekly web show and podcast that explores life well lived, featuring in-depth interviews with acclaimed entrepreneurs, artists, creative professionals, and world shakers. I'm your host, Jonathan Fields. Each episode is also filmed and aired in broadcast quality video every Wednesday at goodlifeproject.com. If you'd like to watch the video or get show transcripts, then head on over to goodlifeproject.com. Now on to this week's show. So my guest today is Jeff Goins. Jeff is an author, a blogger, a writer, creator of some pretty cool educational stuff online. He's someone who's had a really powerful personal journey and transformation, both in terms of his career, the way he earns his living, the way he kind of explores how he gives to the world and what he draws from the world. And so we're going to kind of dive into that journey with him. So it's awesome you hanging out with you today, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jonathan. It's an honor.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So it's you kind of popped onto my radar, I want to say about a year ago, shortly before you released your, I guess it was your first book. And right. And a friend of mine said, hey, there's this guy, Jeff, he's online. He's doing some really good work and sharing some awesome stuff for writers and aspiring authors. So I started checking you out. And then, you know, what was interesting to me is that you have a much bigger backstory than this. So let's take a step back, and tell me, you know, you've got kind of crafted a pretty cool living, these days, but, you know, probably, you know, it was just a couple of years ago. You're Chicago based, and that's not where you're living now. So give me, sort of fill in the gaps a little bit here.
Sure. Well, you know, big question, and so feel free to, you know, interrupt when things get boring. So I was born and raised just outside of Chicago, and I went to college in Illinois, so I spent the first, 22 years of my life there. And went to college, studied abroad in Spain, and became a Spanish major, and kind of fell in love with other cultures, really with the world, and just wanted to see and experience as much as I could. And so, when I left college, I graduated from college, I, joined a traveling music ministry that was, like this, Christian organization where we traveled to all over the U.S. and even parts of Canada, and we spent about a month in Taiwan. And we would just go to churches and schools and prisons, and we would play, concerts. We would, encourage folks, and, did that for a year, and that was kind of like, I thought I was going to be a musician. My dad taught me to play guitar when I was a teenager. I was in a bunch of different bands in high school and college. Always loved music, was, always like the wallflower kid at school dances with like the baggy concert t-shirts, saying, why don't they play any Nirvana or Pearl Jam? And, and so I thought maybe someday I might get to be a rock star, and so traveling as part of this, group was kind of the closest I ever got to that. Then I moved to Nashville, Music City, USA, to pursue a girl who started working in the music business and really struggled. Lived on a friend's couch for about 7 months, worked a couple of part-time jobs. There was a point at which I really had no money, and I collected coins as a kid and had to sell those, through like the local newspaper for basically nothing compared to what they were worth. And just to, get money to buy groceries. And then eventually I was hired by a nonprofit, international organization where I was helping send missionaries all over the world. And I did that for about 7 years. And I started out as a writer, then I got into like blogging and social media. And I started reading Seth Godin, and my boss, had his MBA, and so he's always feeding me business books. And, working for this mission organization, I, kind of got this business education. I learned a lot about online marketing and just started trying stuff out because it's a really cost-effective way to, build a brand. And so we started doing that for our organization. And I got really interested in this sort of, field of online marketing as it might apply to me as a writer, which is something I kind of always thought I might want to do, but wasn't ever sure that I could do it. And so a few years ago, I started yeah, go ahead.
Let me jump in and stop you there. There's a couple things.
Yeah.
There's a ton I'd love to deconstruct, but, so you're basically, you start out as, you get your degree in school. You start out and you're really interested in music. You move from Chicago to Nashville, but not so much for music, but for a girl.
Right. Yeah. to see about a girl, as Goodwill Hunting says.
Right. And then you end up in an organization that it sounds like has nothing to do with music.
Right.
And now you're a writer. So what are the missing steps there?
Yeah. Well, I came to Nashville, to chase a girl, and I thought, man, I have toured with a band for a year. I have a college education. I'm like, it's going to be easy to get some sort of job in the music business or something. And
right.
it was not easy because apparently there was there's 50,000 other people that are wanting the same thing.
Right. Well, especially in Nashville, because that's
right.
where everybody goes. It's like, wait, what year was this also? When are we talking?
So this is like 2006. Yeah, at the end of 2006, I moved into Nashville.
Got it. So the economy hasn't cratered quite yet.
No, but my economy.
Right. No,
I don't.
Right. You're like, I don't know what's happening outside, but mine is rock bottom.
So while I was working with part-time job in a call center, I started spending my afternoons walking around downtown Nashville because I had no friends and I was bored and I had all this free time. And I started hanging out with homeless people. There were a lot of panhandlers in Nashville, and there were a lot more when I moved here. And, everybody is an amazing guitarist, and so it's kind of entertaining to walk the streets of Nashville. And these people would ask me for money, and first I would ignore them, and then I'd tell them no, and then eventually I gave out of guilt. And then I started not feeling good about that either, and so I decided to engage these people because I didn't have anything else to do, anywhere else to be. I started having conversations with these people that I normally would have avoided. And I started becoming friends with people who lived on the streets and found myself wanting to spend more and more time with these people. And, just interested in their story and, how they ended up where they did and how I might be able to help them. Mm-hmm. And so started doing that, started finding ways to help people living on the street, got involved in some local, organizations, here in Nashville that, do outreach and recovery and even some rehabilitation, for homeless people. And
right.
that, that connected with, serving, people all over the world through some of the mission work that our organization was doing. And so, I think that's really my heart. Yeah.
Yeah. It must have been interesting to you also because here you are, you go to Nashville and you're probably feeling like you're feeling down and out, like, you're scraping by barely paying your bills. But then you see these guys.
Right.
And in a certain way, I'm wondering, does a light go on your head and say, there but for the grace of God go I, and I'm actually pretty fortunate.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so I didn't know that there was a name for it, but I was basically a minimalist at the time because I couldn't afford to be anything else. I owned like 25 things, and 20 of those things were books, and the other things were like clothes. Yeah, I remember going downtown to Nashville one time and visiting with some folks, and I picked up some pizzas because I thought that'd be a good thing, and so I started handing out slices of pizza to this group of guys that it's probably November, so it's getting cold, and I had like a backpack full of sweatshirts, and so there's 4 guys there, right, and so I dumped these 4 sweatshirts on the park bench, and these, and these hands, like these frenzy of hands, grabbed these sweatshirts. And then this 5th guy joins the crowd, and he reaches for, I saw him reach for the bench, and, just in time for the last of the 4 sweatshirts to be swiped away, and he has nothing. And he just, kind of recoils, and, no big deal, but I saw that look on his face, like, oh, I thought I had something, and now I don't. And so, it's November. It's a little bit chilly. I see that I'm wearing a sweatshirt, and there's this internal conflict where I have something that this other person could use.
Yeah.
And I've got plenty of these back at home, but this is kind of uncomfortable for me, so what do I do? So I pause and I go, well, yeah, I got it. Obviously, I got to do this. And so I pull off the sweatshirt and I hand it to him. And there's just this look of surprise on his face where he's like, really? And I said, well, yeah, of course. And I mean, it was obvious to me in that moment, that I had an abundance, that I had more than I could ever need, that I had extra sweatshirts back at home, maybe only 2 or 3, but I had extra of this thing that this guy had nothing. He had none of. And I was constantly being humbled by, life's hard and I'm scraping by just to pay my bills. But thank God that I have bills, that are, a sign of the fact that I have electricity to keep me warm. They were reminders. In many ways, my problems were reminders of the blessings that I was unaware of.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing when just the smallest moments in a day kind of snap you back into that place where you're walking around having a crappy day or whatever it is, or complaining, and then something happens completely out of the blue. It can be the smallest thing that you normally would have paid attention to, and you're like, oh wait, oh wow, I need to be in a place of gratitude, because this is the worst thing that I'm dealing with right now is the best thing that somebody could dream to deal with in their life.
Yeah, I just kept realizing what a spoiled brat I was. I didn't grow up privileged by any means. I grew up in kind of a lower middle class family, but we never lived on the streets. We never got kicked to the curb. We always had a roof over our heads, and we always ate hot meals every night. And I realized, wow, that is abundance. I have more than I ever needed, and that makes me rich. Yeah, no, it's powerful. So, and you're also, you're somebody who talk, well, it's kind of interesting with you. So you talk reasonably openly about your faith, and clearly, you're a devoted faith-based person. But on the other hand, what's kind of interesting is when when I would start to read you on the blog, when I read what you've written, you sense strongly that, okay, this is somebody with a strong sense of faith, but in your writing also, it comes across as being very, come on. I'm curious whether that's sort of a deliberate thing with you. Yeah, I think so. It's also natural for me, so I'm not ashamed of the fact that, I'm a Christian and, believe in God. But I also don't come from that background. So I wasn't raised in a culture. And so this was a decision that I came to in college just based on my own experiences and what I thought to be, pretty strong evidence. And so, I've kind of based my life around, these ideas, but I understand, 2 things. One, not everybody thinks that way, and I want to influence people that don't necessarily agree with me. And 2, I grew up, having kind of a bad taste in my mouth of Christians and church-going people, because I saw a lot of hypocrisy and I saw a lot of judgment, and that really repelled me, and I didn't want to be somebody who distributed that. And I do sometimes occasionally catch flack from people that are maybe a little bit more outspoken about their religious worldview, where they go, why don't you talk more openly about this? And honestly, my answer is because I don't. Because this is a part of my life, but it's not something that I constantly broadcast every day to everybody through every single channel. It's something that has kind of quietly but very significantly changed my life. And I think in some ways, if I'm going to influence other people, for good, some of the ways that's going to happen are going to be quiet and over time and not necessarily loud. And frankly, what you read on my blog or in, a book that I would write, is I'm really trying to make it as authentic as it would be if we were sitting down over coffee. This is how I would talk to you. You would know kind of what I'm about, but you wouldn't feel pressured to agree with me.
Yeah, no, and it definitely comes through that way. It's so interesting too how some people, no matter how you play that, and it's like you said, this is a personal decision. The way that you choose to, regardless of what faith or spirituality or non-spirituality comes from, the way that you choose to share that is such a personal decision But what's so interesting is that the more you sort of develop a voice, and the more people start to come into contact with that voice, no matter what, some people are going to push back and say, no, you either need to lean into this more, or you need to back down from it more. And
Right.
It's interesting how everybody wants to sort of overlay the way that they believe that you should be operating in the world, and and the level of transparency or evangelism or not that they believe you should bring to the way that you interact with the world, and overlay that on your life. It's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, it's exhausting.
Yeah.
to try and like entertain all those notions and try to satisfy everybody, and so I just kind of shrug and go, well, like this is what feels right and true to me and what I believe, and so I've got to do that. And I never want to be somebody who I feel like my message has become some form of propaganda, and
right.
And that's what I'm trying to not do.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting for me because I'm a pretty spiritual person, but I share some of that in my writing, but I've made sort of like a similar decision, like different backgrounds, but from a practical application standpoint, I'll share just concepts without any sort of religious or spiritual overlay at all, but just like, here's an idea that might, play with it. It's a very simple practice. It's non-dogmatic, non-ideological, but if you do it every day, it could just kind of change the way that you're experiencing your life, or maybe stress, or maybe this, or give you some answers. Play with it, try it on for size. And it's, and that's kind of been my approach. And even then, like some people love that and some people don't. So, but you gotta, in the end, you just have to do what feels right to you, which is, I think, kind of the final word. So
yeah.
let's kind of jump back into your journey. So you're hanging out in Nashville, and now I think we're getting a much better flavor for what's really happening there. You're not just kind of like moving into different positions. It sounds like it's like an internal process, an internal awakening that's going on in you as you're sort of like down there. So when you decide to, you're in this organization, and I guess the other leap that was interesting to me was that you started in music, and then you said as a writer I started to learn marketing. Talk to me about being a writer, and talk to me about how you decided that you were a writer, and talk to me about how and when you actually declared to the world, I'm a writer.
Yeah. Well, I've always been a writer. I've always written, I should say, but I never considered myself a writer. I never called myself that because I felt like that was a really audacious moniker. That was a title that was only reserved for people who wrote books and got paid to do this professionally. But, I mean, I kind of did this self-assessment just a few years ago where I realized, man, at different points in my life, usually as an escape, I would return to writing. And so it's always been a part of my life, but I never thought it was like a major theme, I was always great at English. My mom used to read me the dictionary and on car trips, which I, came to find out not every, 7-year-old has that happen on vacation. I won the school spelling bee. I won the school spelling bee in 6th grade, and just kind of these random things that I go, yeah, I guess I'm good at that, but who cares? And even in college, there was this moment where I thought maybe I should major in English because I've always been good at that, but I didn't like any of the professors in the English department, and so I decided to major in Spanish, and then I took a second major in religion, and but I started tutoring students in college in writing their essays, and that was kind of my main job throughout college, was helping other students write. And so I always kind of wrote on the side. When I traveled with the band for a year, it was part of my job, part of my position, to submit written summaries of what we did that week and post them online on this website. And this was like right around that when blogging was starting to become a thing, but I didn't know that this was what that was called. And at the end of that year, I heard all about this stuff about blogging, and that's when I started my first Benga blog. And I realized I loved writing, and it was always something that I did kind of on the side, and I loved it as kind of this escape tool. And so when I got hired by this nonprofit, I put on my resume, like, you know, like, 'cause I had no experience, like travel with a band for a year, went to college, and I was a writing tutor for 4 years in college. And the person who hired me, who became my boss, the executive director of the organization, said, "Oh, I see that you're a writer." And he hired me to basically start writing on behalf of the organization and telling some of their stories. And nobody had ever called me that before, which was really interesting. But, you know, as I said, I got into the marketing stuff, and it wasn't until a few years ago when I was having a conversation with a friend where I was writing pretty seriously, getting into the whole blogging thing, still not calling myself a writer. My friend asked me what my dream was, and at first I avoided it. Then he pressed in, and I said, well, I guess it's to be a writer. Then he just looked at me, and he said, Chef, you don't have to want to be a writer. You are a writer. You just need to write. And that was really powerful for me. I don't know that it was like permission, but it was just this unlocking of the fact that I was already this thing that I was striving to be. And so I started calling myself a writer after that. And that's when I believe I started to do my best work. And that's when I started my blog. And that's when, you know, I mean, shortly after that, a book publisher contacted me. Stuff started happening really quickly. And I think it all goes back to really believing that I was this thing that I wanted to be.
Yeah. It's amazing how that sort of like one proclamation can change so many things. It's funny, like people will get all metaphysical about that, you know. But I mean, the way I look at stuff like that is because and it's funny. I'm a pretty science-backed person, so I'm always looking for the science or the evidence. Like, why does stuff like that? Why does somebody stand up and say something or declare something or, you know, declare a need or a thing, and somehow, you know, the universe seems to deliver it? And what I've seen so many times happen is, you know, like an example, and I have no idea if this is what happened with you, but I've seen so many variations where somebody declares something like that, and that shifts something in you that's really subtle, but that's on two levels. On one, it's perceptible to other people because you start carrying yourself differently. Like I'm Jeff Goins, writer, you know, and then the bigger part I think is that it starts like you start behaving differently, and very often it's not big things. It's like, you know, 100 of the tiniest little things or decisions that you would make or actions that you would take that you do a little bit differently because you're like, you know, I'm a writer and this is what writers do. And they start to add up, and, you know, and the world starts to respond to that. I've seen so many times people literally just flip the switch by proclaiming something, or committing to something and doing it in a public way very often. And I think just, you know, through the combination of hundreds or thousands of microscopic changes in behavior and you putting out into the world, hey, listen, this is who I am, and people being able to better define you too. I think people are looking, well, I mean, we know this, you know, human psychology is that people want to label other people, and they have anxiety when they can't. And, you know, like when you tell somebody, like, I'm Jeff Goins, writer, then everybody can sort of share who you are and what you're about, even though you're much bigger than that, obviously. It just makes it easier for people to say, okay, this is what I go to him for. Mm-hmm. So it's a really interesting dynamic that I've seen unfold so many different ways. And I'm sure you've seen that unfold in a lot of different ways too.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely. And I'm a pretty practical guy too. And something that I've always struggled with is confidence. And I've realized that confidence doesn't really come, you know, it kind of has to be taken, you know. And initially, at least in my life, because, you know, I've never been super athletic or, you know, in great shape or, you know, like been the most popular guy or anything. And so, I've never like just had kind of these opportunities to go, yeah, of course I'm awesome. Of course everybody thinks I'm awesome. I've had to earn it. And, you know, and so when I wasn't a writer, nobody was calling me a writer. It was easy to keep believing that story. And so I kind of had to fake it, you know, I had to pretend in a way, but I wasn't really faking anybody but myself. I was faking out myself so that I could believe it, so that I could be confident, so that other people could see it, and then they would go, oh yeah, of course he's a writer, you know, look at him. And so I do agree, and I think it's really interesting. And I do see that a lot, and I tell people that, you know, some of the most destructive words you can say when describing yourself are words like aspiring and wannabe. Mm. You know, maybe you are a writer. Maybe you are an entrepreneur. that doesn't mean you're a very good one. You can be real. You can be real. You can be realistic about who you are and what you do without being, having an overinflated sense of self. But when you say things like aspiring or wannabe, you're saying I haven't arrived yet, and because I haven't arrived yet, I don't really have to try. And if I don't have to try, then of course when people say that I don't do great work, like they're right. And it's like when I call myself something, it makes me bring my A game. And because there is this expectation. And so for me, it was a really powerful thing.
Yeah. So was this around the same time that you started, Goins Writer, or was that a different time?
Yeah. So I mean, a couple months after that, I started this blog, and I had started lots of different blogs. Like, I think a lot of people, you get this idea in the shower, you're like, that would be a great blog. And 5 posts in, you're like, I'm out of ideas.
Right. Yep.
And so I was like, I need to do this, I just need to have a personal blog that's for me and my platform and my brand, whatever that is, so that maybe someday I can write some books, which I thought was the pinnacle of success that I would achieve a decade into this whole journey. Things surprisingly took off pretty quickly.
Yeah, which again, I think so often relates to the fact that, you're in a different place because you've defined who you are. And you can build a mission and actions around that so much more easily, and people resonate with that so powerfully. So I think it's just so much easier to find your voice and to build community. So it doesn't surprise me that happened.
Yeah. It surprised me.
Well, it's always surprised the person who's in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Actually, not always, but I think if you guys like me and you, probably. So from there, you start to actually, you start to build a platform online, but you're still working a full-time gig. I mean, this is not something that's actually generating cash or, is your living at the time.
Right.
So talk to me about the evolution. And, I don't know when did you actually start writing? So what year are we talking about around now?
So this is January, 2011.
So this is really recently.
Yeah, just a couple of years ago, I started the blog, and, for about, I had this blog before that, had gotten what I thought was decent traffic, I had 250 people, 250 readers, subscribers, and that was the most traffic I ever got on a day. It was 250 unique visitors. And I thought, man, that took me 4 years just kind of doing this as a hobby. I thought, I'm going to have to spend at least a couple of years with this new blog to get back to that level of traffic. And so I did something that I was always afraid to do, which was I started meeting people. I started networking, but I didn't think of it like that. I just thought a bunch of cool people live in the city that I live in. I'm just going to try to, get them to meet me for coffee. And when that started happening, I started emailing people and meeting, folks on Skype, people, that are in the blogging, social media world, which was, the space that I thought I might want to spend some time in. And so I started just making friends with people. And so then when I launched this blog, I emailed all those people and they started sharing it. And so that first day that I launched my blog, I had over 600 people visit it, which,
You're like, wow.
Yeah, which is more than I'd ever seen before. And it was amazing. And so I thought, wow, maybe there's something here. There's some potential here of something that I could do that I haven't ever done before. And it just kind of began to reframe my expectations. And, I did what everybody said to do. And I just kind of let down my guard. I was very cynical and skeptical about giving away a free ebook and guest posting and doing all this stuff that I felt on one level was kind of smarmy. But on another level, I understood, the reason that people talk about this, even if it's, a tactic used by smarmy people, is because it's effective. And so if I can use this in a way that is true to who I am, authentically, maybe it'll be effective too. And so I did, and it started working really well, and I gave away this free ebook, and in that week I went from 75 email subscribers to over 1,000. And by month 8, I was contacted by a book publisher, and they asked me if I'd be interested in writing a book.
Which is pretty amazing. So,
yeah.
So tell me about the first book. That was Wrecked, right?
Right. Yeah, and I should say that my blog was based on this, this struggle that I've been having to be a writer, and then I declared myself as a writer. And, I've been teaching writers both with my job and then in college for, close to 8 or 9 years at that point. And so I had, some knowledge about the craft, and I just started sharing what I was learning, and that started to really resonate with people. So I started this blog as a writer, trying to help other writers. And, but I really have been spending the last 4 or 5 years working for this mission organization, spending time with folks on the street. And so I wrote this book called Wrecked, which was about that paradigm shift that happened for me on the streets of Nashville, where I met people who had much less than I ever had, and it wrecked me. It changed the way I looked at life, and I became more grateful, and I became a little bit less comfortable with comfort, and I realized that maybe my life isn't about me. Maybe it's about serving other people, and maybe that's the most fulfilling task that I could give my life to. And Wrecked is basically about that. I interview a bunch of folks who, have done a bunch of different things in life, from, entrepreneurs to missionaries to, writers and authors and photographers and all kinds of different people who have all had the same revelation that their life is not about them, and the most fulfilling way to live their life is to give it away to others.
So, and when that, so it's amazing, because then it's really just the culmination of your experience. Like, it's blending your writing, it's blending sort of like a personal awakening about what you're here to do, and your abilities to, sort of pull this all together into a book format. At this point, are you thinking to yourself, I'm curious, just from and maybe you're not even considering this at all, is this a one-shot deal? Is this, okay, now I'm ready now. I'm going to start to, make the leap and see if I can become an author, and make this my full-time thing? Or kind of what's going on in your head in terms of, what the evolution of your, the way that you're going to contribute to the world is?
Yeah, well, no, this was not on my radar. Even after I'd written the book, even, up to it getting published, I just thought, okay, like, all the writers that I know aren't rich, so, and a lot of them are bivocational. They've got even like successful writers. You go, oh, like this, this person's an author. They've got 5 books. It's amazing. It's just not a lucrative profession for most people. And so I just assumed that this would be this thing that I did on the side. Like, every few years, I'd write a new book, and I'd always have a job, and this would be something that I would do on the side. It was just my passion, and I was fine with that. And frankly, nothing changed about that. Yeah, that was a dream, but I never thought it was possible until my wife and I got pregnant, and we started talking about her staying home to raise our son, because that was something she really wanted to do. And I realized we can't live off of just my income. And I was sort of forced to find a way to make a living, and I was just trying to replace my wife's income off of my platform, off of this blog that I had built, off of, getting other book deals, whatever I could do. And I knew that the book publishing route was not a very quick way to make good money, and so I didn't even really consider that. But I started reading all these blogs that you and I are familiar with about, making money online and trying to find ways to build a business around this, fairly large audience that I had amassed by the, at that point of, blogging for about a year. I had, tens of thousands of email subscribers and lots of people visiting my blog, and it was actually costing me money. I thought, like, if I built this thing, the money would come, and then when I actually had to build a business, I was like, oh, I guess I got to figure out how to do that.
Right. So you start to really brainstorm and say, okay, my family situation is changing. I want to continue to serve. I want to continue to write, and basically just start brainstorming. Okay, I've built this asset, I'm serving a lot of people, I'm building a community. What else can I do to serve them? And this is where, it always gets dicey with people in the online world too, because you feel like, you've built a community and you've given a ton to them and a lot of value, and that's why people are there. You build relationships. And like you said, it's costing you money. And at some point you want to be able to say, hey, listen, I'd love to keep doing this, but in order for me to keep doing this in some way, shape, or form, I got to pay my rent.
Right. Yeah. And so I just I didn't know anything about this, and so I just started asking people, And I got a lot of good advice from do a survey to, spend the weekend creating a quick ebook, offer something cheap just to see what people are willing to pay for. And I spent about 3 or 4 months just failing, trying to do the advertising thing, but never really being able to make any decent money at that, even with a lot of traffic that I was getting. And so eventually I thought, well, what do I do that people find value in? And I just started asking my community, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? And they wanted more tips. They wanted more help with writing and blogging. And so, I spent some time putting together an ebook, and very afraid and hesitantly, I put together this ebook that I sold for $2.99. And I was like, no way people are going to pay me $3 whole for this. Like, they're not going to buy it. And so I sent an email to my list and said, here's this thing, and like, here's 1,000,001 reasons to buy it now, and the price is going to double. All this stuff that I studied. I was just like, please don't hate me. And about 500 people bought that pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And I was, so I made $1,500 like that. And that was amazing to me. That was like a paycheck. And that was the first indication that maybe there was something here that I was unaware of.
Yeah. Which I guess sort of like served as the foundation for you then saying, okay, I'm not only a writer, but I'm somebody who has valuable information and knowledge that I can share, either through the creation of ebooks or courses or whatever it may be. And I guess the quest really for you is still largely, hey, listen, we're about to have our first kid. I'd love for, my wife and I would both love if she could stay home and raise him. And that becomes a pretty powerful incentive, I'm imagining.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, for me, it was no longer about me, and I think that was probably a hinge moment for me, was to realize, yeah, this is uncomfortable for me, but it's not for me. This is a way that I can serve my family. And as I started to do it, I realized, well, I'm actually serving my community by offering valuable products and services for them that they still feel like they're getting a deal on. And I started to feel really good about that. But that initial step into, okay, I'm going to now charge you for some of this stuff was very scary. And I think, if we never got pregnant, it never would have happened.
Yeah, no, it's a terrifying step. But what's amazing is when you do it, so many people line up and say, thank you. Not only thank you for giving us something, that we really need, we're in pain and you have answers, thank you for that. But also what I found, I think what a lot of people have found who sort of created a lot of experiences and content over a long period of time for people, is that people want to give back in some way, shape, or form, and they almost feel a little bit weird when they never can. And it's almost like, you're giving them a way to feel okay. It's kind of odd. There's a reciprocity that I think exists deep in all of us, just innately. And when we feel that we can't sort of, create some sort of parity, people feel bad. And so, it works on sort of a deeper psychology level too.
Yeah, I think that's true. I started to hear that. I tried to be pretty generous with my community, giving away a lot of free stuff for over a year. And I started to entertain these ideas about selling stuff, in part because, because we were having a kid. But I started seeing the blog as a way for doing that when people started emailing me saying, hey, this is great. Thanks for this other free thing that you gave us. Can we pay you for something? Like, I started to get emails where people were legitimately saying, I really want to be able to pay you. This is too much stuff. Can I send you some money? At which point I thought, wow, there might be something here. And I think you're right. I do think there is this kind of sense of angst or dissonance if you're doing all these favors for me and occasionally I can't repay the favor. That actually makes me feel good being able to do that. And it's a gift sometimes to be able to give that to other people, I think. Yeah,
no, completely agree. So you're building this thing, and now you've got one book out. You're officially an author. The book does pretty nicely. And now you start to build sort of more of an online presence, and and it's turning into something pretty substantial. And then, it comes time for you to focus on the next book, which is a book that's out just around the time that we're having this conversation, actually. And the topic of the book, I think, is really interesting. So, the topic of the first book was Wrecked, and it was based on your experience sort of, like being changed, by seeing people's circumstances. And, talk to me about this next book. So, the more recent book is called The In-Between. And I'm curious how you chose the topic and the name, and whether there was something really personal, or whether it was just sort of something that had evolved and you've been thinking about. So, share a little bit about that.
So, Jonathan, I think there is this tension in my life between adventure and commitment. And so at any stage in my life, I'm sort of struggling with these two extremes. Do I commit to where I am, to the path that I'm on, because certain growth only comes with commitment? Or do I seek out the next big experience because those are life-changing too? And so Wrecked was really about big moments. You need to get wrecked. You need to have your paradigm shifted. And stories in that book are stories of pain and suffering and exposure to poverty, and how it opened people's eyes to a world that was bigger than them and not just about them, and how that changed my life. But what I've really been struggling with over the past few years is how my life has slowed down, and moreover, how I've kind of been okay with it. I've been okay with just taking my time, not having these big, huge experiences every single day. But if I would look, if my 21-year-old self would look at my 30-year-old self, which, I'm now 30, my 21-year-old self might say that I'm a sellout, that I'm not doing all these amazing things. I have a mortgage, I have a fence with a minivan and all these things where I would go like, yeah, that's selling out. You're not being radical. You're not doing kind of extraordinary, amazing, adventurous things. And I love adventure. But the in-between is about what happens in between big moments in life. And I realized kind of in my late 20s that I was rushing through life to get to the next big experience. And everything that came before and after that big experience was just throwaway moments. And as I get older, I realize there's more and more of those throwaway moments. And the idea in the in-between is maybe we shouldn't throw those moments away at all. Maybe that's where the really good stuff in life is. It just is a little bit more subtle, and it takes eyes to see it that way.
Yeah. And I think so many people feel that, and I think also a lot of people feel that as they get a little bit older, they're grown up, and they're, you accumulate responsibility, a family, and I think the word accumulate is something that people feel rather than say, okay, I'm gifted with this, and so things change, but when you're, I think it's a really interesting sort of space to explore. So take me a little bit into sort of like the big ideas.
Yeah. So, this is a book that I wrote as a memoir, but it's not really about me. It's about this in-between space that I think we all can relate to. And, I think everybody, in the book I argue that everybody is waiting for something, whether it's waiting to get married, waiting to get that dream job, waiting to have your first kid, waiting to sell the house and travel the world, whatever. We are all in a place of not yet. We're not quite where we were, but we aren't quite who we want to be in life. And I call that the in-between. And basically I argue in the book that we need to be present in these moments. We need to embrace these moments, not resent them. And when we do that, I think we learn a few important lessons. First of all, we learn just how to slow down and shut up and just enjoy life. The second thing we learn is that inconveniences are actually where we grow a lot of the time. We don't grow when everything's great. We grow when we're in that tension of, I want this thing, but it's not yet here. And this is like our greatest opportunity for growth. And then the last thing that I've learned, and it's kind of a paradox, but when you don't resent these times, when you really embrace them, it's okay, like maybe life is trying to teach me something here. what is it? There's this great joy that comes along with just being here now, being present, locking eyes with the person in front of you instead of checking your iPhone, learning to, finding things to appreciate about your job, even if you don't want to be there, in 6 months. There's really this joy that comes with embracing where we are right now. It doesn't mean that we stop dreaming or we stop aspiring. It just means that maybe we don't throw away the time that we have right now, because that's all we ever have is right now.
Yeah, and I think it's so powerful for so many people, especially today, because so many people feel like they're in a time, both in the economy and the world and in their lives, where they're caught in this space and they're waiting for the next iteration to finally be okay and feel okay. And maybe it'll come, but maybe it won't. And, I think the idea of saying, regardless, no matter what is going to happen tomorrow or the next day or next year, what if I just found a way, what would I need to do, or what would it take to be as happy, as content as I can possibly be now, and just relish it and be grateful for it now. And it's amazing when I've seen that happen, and people are like, well, it's a process, it's going to take time. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. And what I've seen is that it can be a process, it can take time, but it can also literally be the flip of a switch to just change the way that you experience the exact same circumstance.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic to say I'm working on being happy now, but I won't have mastered that until later. So if you say it takes time, there's kind of an irony to that statement, which is, well, if it takes time, then you're not doing it. You're still kind of delaying your joy and your gratification for later. But I get it. I know it's hard. I kind of view it as a discipline where I go, okay, today is all I have, and it's as perfect as it's going to be, and I can embrace that, or I can go, man, this sucks, and I just gotta wait for tomorrow to be better. And that kind of attitude just begets more of the same kind of attitude, which is delaying. And, you can really delay your whole life, waiting for the next big moment, missing everything that's in front of you right now. Annie Dillard has this great quote where she says, how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. And the reason that I wrote this book is I was spending my days and in consequence my life, waiting for the next big thing, not embracing the fact that the biggest thing I could ever want is right here, right now. Because we're not guaranteed tomorrow. Who knows what's going to happen to your job or your life or your loved one in the immediate future. All you have is right now. So relish it. Because it's all we ever have.
Yeah, no, I love that. It reminds me of, there's this really short book that Anna Quindlen wrote a couple of years back called A Short Guide to a Happy Life. And it was, I think it was, my recollection is it was actually a commencement speech that she never gave because, their flight, something happened. So she put it in the book. And I still remember, one of the last lines in the book, she was telling a story about how she was walking along a boardwalk. And, she came upon a homeless guy. And it was cold and it was a winter and he was just sitting up on the railing. And, she goes up to him and she's like, why are you standing here? Why are you just sitting here? Why don't you go do something? Find shelter? And he just looks at her and he says, look at the waves, man. Look at the waves. He's just completely in the moment and he's like, look, I'm finding something that is stunning. I'm finding a moment of awe in a really tough time. And I think it's also, I think part of this, the conversation, we shouldn't make light of the fact that there are going to be moments in all of our lives where that's going to be brutally hard. There are moments where we're waiting around and, there's nothing, but there are also going to be moments where there are really big things happening in our lives and sometimes not good things happening in our lives and our health or things where, finding that frame will be brutally hard. And I think, to me, I've always believed that, I meditate every day. The first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is I sit for 25 minutes. And, one of the reasons that I do it is because I know that it's a practice, and the benefit doesn't come when I just sit in that one time, it comes in my ability to consistently be able to sort of zoom the lens out over time so that when those tougher times come, when the bigger challenges come, at that point I've already built the practice and I can access it with far more ease. And I think that's a big lesson for a lot of people too.
Yeah, there's this guy named Charles Whiston, I think who's like an old Anglican or Episcopal minister in the early 20th century, and he wrote a couple of books on prayer, and he talks about this idea of the Snowflake Principle. And he said, and basically in our quick culture, like we want to pray, like, oh God, help me, prayers, and we're sort of, we've become disillusioned with the idea of, the practice of prayer and meditation, because we're like, I want to do it once and be awesome, Can I just go to retreat and be Buddha? Is that how that works? Can I get enlightenment, in a seminar? And it doesn't work like that. And so the snowflake prayer is basically you pray the same thing over and over again every day. Not as a ritual, just as a cold dead ritual, but as a practice, as a discipline, because you're persistent and you want this thing. You believe this thing is a good thing to have. And as you pray these prayers over time, the snowflakes build up into something really big. And we know what happens when you push a snowball down a hill. It compound and compound and compound, and it turns into something really powerful. But I always thought that was interesting, this idea that we want it right now, and we might, throw up a quick prayer or, change our lives over the course of a weekend. But I think the biggest, most profound change in our lives and in the world is often a result of long, hard work.
Yeah, no doubt. And I love the fact that you're kind of diving into that in the in-between, you just really dive into this and explore it. So I think it's a conversation that a lot of people bounce past because, it's something that they don't think about all that often. Maybe they don't want to think about, but, as the world gets quicker and as we're increasingly inclined to just blow past those moments and write them off, I love any opportunity to just hit pause and say, oh, wait a minute, this moment matters, not as much as any other one. So it's a great, it's a really interesting topic to me. And especially, I'm a little bit obsessed with uncertainty and action and inaction. It kind of ties in a really neat way to that too. So the name of this project is A Good Life Project. And, so when I offer that phrase to you, to live a good life, I'm curious, what comes up?
Well, to live a good life, I think that, I think that you have to base your life around something bigger than you. I found that my life was pretty empty and meaningless for many years until I could find a truth that was bigger than me. And to really embrace that and have to submit to it, and at times wrap my life around that truth instead of trying to get, truth to conform to my life. And so I think that's really important, and I think we are not our most fulfilled and not living the best life we can until in some way we're pouring out our gifts and skills in service to others. And I think it's really interesting in our culture that we see people who have accumulated everything that you could possibly get. Someone like Bill Gates, or even like Angelina Jolie or George Clooney. These people who kind of have everything. People love them. They have a lot of money. And what do we see them doing kind of towards the middle of their lives? They just start giving it all away. Bill Gates is giving away a bunch of money. Angelina Jolie is become an ambassador. George Clooney is a pretty outspoken human rights activist for Sudan. It's just fascinating to me that the things that we laud in our culture, these are good things that you want. The people that have all those things don't want them anymore. So maybe the good stuff isn't stuff at all. And I think that, probably those two principles are really, important to me and how I live my life, helping others and, basing my life around the truth that's bigger than me.
Yeah, no, I love that. Definitely two great things to think on. So, thank you so much for the conversation today. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed getting to know more about sort of your path and your journey and being able to share it with everybody else who will be tuning into this.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. It's really an honor to know you and be a part of this project. I love it. I've loved some of the interviews I've gotten to listen to, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to not just, promote something, but actually talk about life together. It was a real pleasure.
Yeah, no, pleasure is mine as well. So my guest today has been Jeff Goins, and Jeff is a writer and author. Really fascinating new book called The In-Between. You guys go check it out. Signing off for Good Life Project.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of Good Life Project. For access to show transcripts, broadcast quality video, and insider updates and invitations, head on over to goodlifeproject.com and subscribe. And be sure to subscribe to the audio podcast and share it with friends so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes. I'm Jonathan Fields, signing off for Good Life Project.